Welcome back to my channel. This is Psychic Medium Raymond Guzman, and today I'm going to be doing a a psychic reading on, or mediumship reading on Miss Harriet Tubman. Um, this is something that was requested by one of my viewers, and I feel like very connected to Miss Tubman to do this video. Um, throughout history, the topic of slavery has been something that has been discussed by many, textbooks, and certain things have been documented, but there's a lot of things that were omitted. And, I feel like there's not one particular textbook that could cover everything that happened during the slavery times, the way they were treated, and the things that I'm going to be discussing in this video as I'm channeling her soul and channeling my spirit guides as well, to give the messages. So before I even begin, if you are someone who is an empath, this is my, viewer discretion is advised. What I'm going to discuss is going to be very difficult for some people to listen to. It may not be something that you would like to listen to, so I'm just giving you the benefit of the doubt. If you don't, if you feel like at any time in this video that you're uncomfortable, please feel free to click out, and then you can come back to it later if you, feel it's going to raise your vibration. But I'm going to do this from a loving place, and respecting Miss Tubman's spirit and soul, because I do feel like there's a lot of pain behind this woman, this lovely woman, who suffered a lot of injustice and witnessed a lot of injustice during the slavery time. So I'm going to go ahead and get into it immediately. So as I'm connecting, being that I'm a physical medium, I'm already feeling restriction in my throat chakra. So this is telling me as she's stepping forward that she perhaps doesn't want me to discuss a lot of things for a lot of people to know. So I'm going to try to discuss the main things that she is allowing me to see, because I feel a lot of uncomfortableness on my throat area already. She was someone who was very much a loving person. I do feel that life changed her completely during her childhood. She didn't have the normal childhood upbringing, being born into slavery, in a family of slavery. Her father, had to endure a lot of abuse. Her family, her friends, other kids that she witnessed, there was things that she would have gone through, sexual abuse at a very young age. There would have been beatings that she would have witnessed. These were lashings on the back with whips. These were being punched and kicked, people being punched and kicked all around, people being starved, people being hung, being dragged by horse, being shot. There was people that were shot at that time. There was people being thrown boiling water on their skin. And again, just horrific crimes that you couldn't even imagine. It breaks my heart to even discuss this. But I'm seeing visions and snapshots of what she would have seen. She was a seer as well. For those of you, if you're looking into her eyes, you can tell that this lady could see into the soul of many people. Seers or clairvoyants usually have that, these special set of eyes where when you look at that person's eyes, you can tell that more or less that they can see into the soul of another person. And she has these set of eyes where she saw a lot of things. She's a very old soul. She felt a lot of pain throughout all the injustices that that she had. Her life was far from perfect. I feel like, growing up, she didn't have a sense of self. There was a lot of fear, but she was very courageous, and she broke out of that, throughout all her years of being, involved in the slavery, and in the latter part of her life trying to free people from the slavery. And she fought against, injustices of these slave owners. It created anger. It created frustration. Her soul is not a happy soul when she goes back to these memories and these things. Yes, she's forgiven those masters and those people that were slave owners, and the injustices and killings that they did. But a part of her and her ancestors and the people that are with her in spirit are not happy. A lot of these souls did haunt a lot of these families, these bloodlines that did a lot of injustice to them, and they haunted those areas where a lot of these deaths took place. So where she would have, modern day would have been, today in modern day, wherever she would have lived back then, on those plantations and those places, she would have, those people would be experiencing, whoever is there now, specifically if they're Caucasian, they would be, and I'm not trying to turn this into a race thing, but I'm just explaining, being that there are so many hauntings and there were primarily a lot of death on those properties, from, of African Americans. There's going to be some level of haunting for generations that are there. A lot of these souls are still at unrest. A lot of them were killed and murdered, and there was no law to stop it back then because, again, they were considered property of the slave owners. So it's a very hard thing. I do feel like at a very young age she was abused, and I do feel like it caused some kind of trauma early on. I don't know if this is documented, but I feel like she felt pregnant. She felt pregnant, and there was like not an abortion, but a miscarriage of children. And I feel like this happened 3 times in her life. I keep getting 3 different times, and it caused damage to her uterus, to that particular area of her body. So she would have been incapable of having children. I don't feel like she wanted to have any kind of children after that. And I feel like she was sterile in many ways after that trauma, which is something that, I don't know if people can become sterile later on, but that's what I'm getting from spirit, or how that works. I think you can be born sterile or you can become sterile. It's different. I guess I don't even know if that's the proper word for a female. I know for males they refer to it as sterile, but I do get that she would have had the inability to hold a child in her uterus or in her womb. So there was a lot of emptiness and void in her life, regarding children. And she always thought to herself, why can't I, be like everyone else? Why couldn't I be born white? And I know this, a lot of people that will be listening to this may say that sounds ridiculous, but you have to kind of understand the time frame that they were living in. The people back then, the consciousness in the 3D, there was a lot of darkness. A lot of these people were very primitive. It was a very dark period. And a lot of the black people back then, they had this. A lot of them that were being tortured. They had a lot of time to think about life and think about their situation. In many ways, I hear her saying, that she is very proud to be black and she is very proud to have lived as Harriet Tubman. But if, she did think for a period of time, what would have it been like her life if she would have been black. I think a lot of people listening to this would be able to relate. There's a lot of people that are Caucasian, Asian, Hispanic descent, and would, sometimes wonder, what would I look like if I was this race, or what would I be experiencing if I was this race. So I do feel like in many ways she was thinking about, if she would have been white, she would have been married, she would have had kids, her life would have been so much different. It wouldn't have been struggles. But this lady, didn't sleep well. She didn't eat well. I feel like there was a lot of physical problems with her. At one point, she would have had a stroke towards the end on the right side of her brain. I take that back. On the left side of the brain, I'm being told. It would have been a small, not a hemorrhage, but like a blood clot, but it passed through. So I don't know if all this is documented, but I do get that she would have had a stroke, a mini stroke, but it didn't cause any permanent damage. I do feel like she also had a lot of arthritis, a lot of pain in her body. There was vision problems as well. So I do feel like she was partially blind, if not blind in one eye. And I feel like this was more like the right eye, I believe. There was some hearing loss towards the end as well. and there was something going on with her lungs. I feel like she did like form blood clots. Some people would call it embolism on the backside, because I'm feeling a lot of pain on my back. And so she's telling me she was beaten on her back. She was kicked. She was punched. She was slapped. Her hair was pulled out. There was like bald spots at certain times. These are the kind of torture that a lot of these slave owners and the people, the crew that worked for these that were white as well, would have, imparted or administered to Harriet and people that were, slaves in that time frame. And it's awful just to feel what I'm feeling from it. So no, she's not happy, when she goes back and reflects on all of these things that have happened. And like I said, there's a lot of anger for the injustices um, that have happened, and she still sees it. She says that she still sees it today happening in our society. It's something that hasn't really changed. It may have changed in format or in form, the people that are behind it. But even though slavery doesn't exist, racism still exists. The racists are still out there, and it's something that we see in today's society. She does talk about President Obama and how she was very proud for him to be the first African American president from heaven. She's saying that she did see that, and that she just can't believe it, but she is very proud of him, and very glad that him and Michelle Obama were the first African American couple to be the POTUS and the FLOTUS of the United States of America. She says that in some ways she does feel validated by that, by her work and all the work of the people during the civil rights movement and stuff. She was very aware of all of that was going on. Even though she passed in 1913, her soul was very aware from the spirit side, from the spirit world, about everything that was going on. I do get that she felt in many ways that she had to be like a man, stripped down. Like, she didn't feel beautiful on the outside. Very much she had the soul of a man, and I do feel like in a past life she was actually a man. But in this life, I do feel like she had to be very much so like a man and think like a man. And there was a point where she couldn't be emotional. She had to be emotionless and void of emotion to get through, to save people, to save children and young women, and run them through the Underground Railroad and all of that. I also feel like she was very experienced in magic. There was a lot of remedies, like a healer. She would have known different tonics and things like herbs to use to kind of heal people. So some people did fear her. Some people would have called her a witch. Some people would have called her a voodoo priestess, or a voodoo, a person that does voodoo. But I do feel like she was well versed in many things, and she did see the spirits of these people that she would have witnessed killed. She did see a lot of these souls walking. She did make predictions as well. She knew outcomes. She knew the heart of people. When she would look at them, she knew exactly what they were thinking. She knew if this, slave owner was a good slave owner or was a bad slave owner. And she knew, if, she knew even on her, she's saying that she even knew among her, her peers, she calls them family. But these would have been like guys that would have been slave owners, and I mean, not slave owners, but slaves and other people that, the women, the families of them. She said she knew who of them was going to, try to revolt. A lot of these slaves tried to go up against their owners, the masters. They called them masters, and they ended up dying in the process because they weren't prepared. But there was revolts. There was a lot of fights between the slaves and these owners to try to get free. All they wanted was to be treated decently, to be treated humanely, to be fed, and to be treated like a human being. The conditions that you would think of, like in today's modern, I'm trying to find a good way to describe this. Let's say like Alcatraz, there was a lot of things that were not good in that prison. Well, just think of that, of those conditions. If you've ever been familiar with like the conditions, or you've read about the story of Alcatraz, basically there was a lot of inhumane, things that took place there in Alcatraz in a prison. Think about that, or any modern day prison, and you're restricted from your freedom. And that's the way she's kind of positioned it to me, to get that message across to everyone that would be listening. When you think of a prison, you think of people who are stripped from their rights. They no longer have certain things, but they're still within the prison. There's still people that sneak in things and that have accommodations. Well, this is the same thing that she says, but it was magnified by 10 times. So even though they were free in a way, where they weren't closed inside of a building locked up, um, even though she did go through that too, they did lock up a lot of these slaves for days without water and food. That's another whole thing. But she's saying that just think of a prison and being that magnified by tenfold. And even though you are, free and you can go through the pastures and outside and see the sky, there was this sense in your heart and soul knowing that you were not free, and that at any moment you could be taken out, and there was no accommodations, no luxury. A lot of these slaves slept on cold, cement floors on the ground. A lot of them slept outside. There was a lot of exposure to diseases, a lot of exposure to cold environments. They had to make do with the best thing. There was a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of chills, a lot of inhumane conditions that you cannot even begin to imagine. What I'm describing and telling you here is just snippets. And again, I'm keeping it short because she doesn't want me to go into full detail for that. It's very painful to even think about that. For those of you that are listening, I do have some African American blood in me, as well as Native American and Spanish. So I do have African American ancestry, and from Northern Africa, and also a part of Western Africa. So it's hard for me to even think that my ancestors, whoever my bloodline was African American, and maybe their, ancestors went through a lot of this torture. It sickens me. It really makes me, and in many ways, I feel like, a lot of this is repeating itself in history. It's repeating itself in society today. Like she has told me, as I'm channeling her soul and her spirit and these messages, it's still taking place today. We may not see it make the news, like it normally, they don't want to show this in the news, but the movement, she's talking about Beyonce as well. And I know that people will be listening to this would probably say, how would she know about Beyonce? Believe me, spirit knows about all things, and she's like very proud of Beyonce, and also the black movement, that Black Lives Matter and all these different projects. So she is aware of everything that's going on. You'd be surprised how much spirit is in tune with everything. And she's looking and she's sending me visions of famous people today. Beyonce's one of them, and then she's showing me other people, that have taken part in some way towards giving the black community, and African Americans in general, a voice. People that are continuously working to help improve society, and she's aware of everything that is going on. And that's why I said she brought up Barack Obama, and Beyonce and some other people throughout history. She's also talking about Martin Luther King, and how proud she was. She's with him on the other side, and she's talking about how he reminded her so much. His courage and his love reminds her so much of herself, and she could see that in him. In many ways, I feel like she was guiding him too, from the other side. But overall, she did see many things. She knew that it was never going to get better, and she knew that she was never going to experience true happiness. But now she is happy. In many ways, she is fulfilled. Yes, she still is a little upset and angry with what has happened, but she still has love for people, and she doesn't hate white people. She doesn't despise white people. She's saying people don't understand that. A lot of them think that listening to this, that she would people that were in the slavery back then, like her and other slaves, that they would have hatred towards white people, or people that were families of the slave owners. There's some of her, she's calling them family that are earthbound, that do haunt and that do have this kind of hatred towards those people. But she's saying no, that she's not like that, and she doesn't have that hatred, and that pain. And she wants people today, that are African American and any race, that is in experiencing any kind of injustice. She's saying it's not just African Americans. It's, every race experiences some kind of form of discrimination, and of racism. And she just wants people to really come together and just really accept and see the beauty that we all have inside. We're not different than anyone else. We're all connected to a higher power. And so she's saying, that in time things are going to definitely get better as consciousness elevates. And, her story, she wants people to remember the pain, and she wants them to continue to study Black history, because there's a lot of things that were not documented in these textbooks. There's a lot of things that were not documented, a lot of injustices and things that are not discussed, but a lot of these generations of African Americans, Black people, would know, through their families. It was passed down, a lot of these things that would have happened. Going into the Underground Railroad, and saving these people, she had a mission, a very important mission here on Earth, and that was to help people, to help them escape from this torture, from giving them a new opportunity for freedom. And she's saying that she felt very vindicated by doing this, and if she could go back, she wouldn't change it. She wouldn't change for fighting for what was right. And she knew what was right, and she was being guided by God. She was very much connected to the source, the God source, and she knew, and this was a cross that she had to bear. She says that through her, there was a lot of different other people that had the courage to come forth and to stop all of these injustices. Through her, a lot of future generations became empowered. And it's something that's very true. If you're listening to this message, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, the list goes on and on and on. There's people that have taken a stand, and that's what she is saying, that she had to, in many ways live a life that wasn't the life that she would have wanted, but it was the life that was needed to be lived at that time to serve a lesson to humanity. And in many ways, it elevated her as like being a teacher on the other side. So I do feel like in many ways she does help people on the other side, from the other side, and helps people here on Earth now, with their consciousness and with, the way that they handle things, helping them to kind of embrace uniqueness and embrace all races, and spread love. So yeah, this was, very difficult, but I do feel like she's okay. She's definitely okay, and she just loves, everybody that would be listening to this, and listening to her story. And again, there's people that would be listening to this that may not agree. There's always going to be, different stories that are fabricated or documented on textbooks and history books, but a lot of that is not accurate. A lot of it was things were omitted, or things were not discussed because they were considered too controversial and whatnot. She does make me also feel, she's saying one last thing, that she did fall in love with a white man. So I feel like this was maybe one of the slave owners, one of the masters that she would have had. But there was someone that she did fall in love with that was white, and it wasn't African American. This is a secret that she took with herself. I don't feel like she would have discussed this with a lot of people, or even discussed it at all. But there was a secret romance, a secret feeling that she would have had for someone, but it was unrequited love, due to the differences in the color of skin, due to the differences of the time period that they were in, and the injustices that were served. But she does say, she just wants people to cleanse themselves and purify themselves. And she keeps showing me baptisms in the water. So there was people that would have been dressed all in white. These were children of slaves, and people being baptized. And she's referencing the Wade in the Water song, and being baptized. So she's saying, there's a lot of people that are going to be going through this period of transformation and purification in the world. And it's something where even though racism and prejudices may not necessarily go away completely, there is healing and there is a lot of light that is coming, but we have to be patient. This is something that we may see more prevalent in the next few years as more star children are born, more star seeds, more rainbow children, crystal children, and as the indigos evolve and get older, the indigo generation. But she says there's a lot of light in the earth that is going to heal a lot of this and raise consciousness so that racism becomes something of, something where it's very minimal, and eventually there will be a time period when we all get to see that, kind of obliterated completely. It may not be during our lifetime for those of us that are listening now, but it will be way out in the future when consciousness has reached 5D, 6D state. So these were the messages that I channeled from Miss Harriet Tubman. I want to thank Harriet Tubman's soul for allowing me to do this and all her ancestors for great respect. And I want to thank all my listeners for taking the time to listen to this psychic reading, mediumship reading on the subject. And the message that I want to leave from what I got from all of this today is to love one another, to put, regardless of your age, sex, sexual orientation, color of skin, put it all aside. You'd be surprised when you get your DNA test how many of you that would be listening to this would have a percentage of African American in you. None of the bloodlines are pure. We all come from a mixture. A lot of people would be surprised that you have mixtures of maybe races or ancestry that you didn't even know that you had in your bloodline. But basically, to love one another, to respect each other, and to just really show love. That's all it's all about. So if you know anyone that's going through any prejudice or racism, and you are aware of it, don't just sit there and let that person go through it. Take a stand, defend them, put a stop to it. I think more and more people need to do that. If we could do that collectively as a society and stand up for our brothers and sisters and love one another, that this world would be such a better place, and it would be so much better than what it is today. So thank you so much for listening. If you did like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Also, be sure to follow me on Facebook and Instagram. And if you would like to set up a private reading with me, you can go to my website. That's www.raymondguzman.net /shop. Blessings and love and light. Have an amazing day.